I thought I'd gotten lucky when they offered me the graveyard shift at the Provincial Records Bureau. 23 years old, drowning in student debt, living in a basement apartment where the ceiling leaked brown water every time it rained. The job posting said audio preservation specialist, which sounded a hell of a lot better than what it actually was, sitting alone in a converted storage facility outside the city, digitizing old recordings that nobody would ever listen to. The pay was decent, the hours were brutal, and the building creased. The building was a concrete box with fluorescent lights that hummed like they were trying to tell you secrets. But I needed the money, so I showed up every night at 10 p.m., clocked in, and started feeding deteriorating cassette tapes into the transfer machine. Most of it was mundane stuff, town council meetings from the 80s, school board recordings, a wedding reception where someone's uncle got too drunk and started singing off key. I put on my headphones, hit play, and let the voices of dead strangers fill my skull while I logged metadata into the system. Then they brought me Box 47. It arrived on a Tuesday. No fanfare, just sitting there on my desk when I walked in, wrapped in yellowed backing tape that looked like it had been applied decades ago. The shipping label was barely legible, but I could make out a return address, Regional Archive Services, Building C. I'd never heard of Building C. Inside were 63 cassette tapes, each one labeled with nothing but a date. No names, no locations, no context, just dates written in faded blue ink on peeling white labels. Most of them were from the late 70s, a few from the early 80s, and 3 of them were dated for next month. I stared at those 3 tapes for a long time. My first thought was that someone had screwed up the labeling. Maybe they'd gotten the decade wrong. Maybe it was supposed to be 1985, not 2025. It happens sometimes with old records people got sloppy, mixed up their numbers. But the handwriting was identical across all the tapes. Same pen, same hand. Same hand. Same careful, deliberate strokes. I set those 3 aside and started with the oldest recording. Popped it into the deck, adjusted my headphones, hit play. Static, not unusual. Half the tapes I processed were corrupted beyond repair, reduced to white noise and magnetic decay. I let it run for 30 seconds, then fast forwarded. More static. I skipped ahead again. Still nothing. I was about to log it as unrecoverable when I heard something underneath the hiss. Not a voice. Not exactly. It was more like a rhythm, a pattern in the noise, like someone tapping their fingers against a table, but irregular. Hesitant, I rewound and listened again. The pattern was still there, clearer this time. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap. It reminded me of Morse code, but it didn't follow any sequence I recognized. I jotted down the pattern in my notebook and moved on to the next tape. Same thing. Steady, but with something moving underneath it. This time it sounded like breathing slow, measured breaths that didn't quite sync with human lungs. Too long on the inhale, too short on the exhale. Third tape, footsteps. Someone walking across what sounded like wooden floorboards, their gait slightly off, like one leg was dragging. Fourth tape, a door creaking open, then nothing, then the door creaking shut, then nothing, then the door creaking open again, over and over, for 17 minutes. None of them contained voices, none of them contained speech, just sounds. Isolated, deliberate, repeating. I started digging. The Records Bureau had a skeletal online database, barely maintained, mostly full of broken links and outdated information. But after 2 hours of searching, I found a reference to Box 47 in the digitized memo from 1993. It mentioned materials recovered from Site 12 and included a note that the tapes had been transferred from municipal custody pending review. Site 12 didn't mean anything to me, so I kept digging. Eventually, I found an archived news article from 1981, just a few paragraphs in a regional paper. Buried in the local interest section, it talked about a village in the northern mountains that had been evacuated due to environmental concerns. No specifics, no follow up articles, just a vague mention that the residents had been relocated and the area was now off limits. The village didn't have a name in the article, but in the memo, someone had scrawled a note in the margin. Locals call it the place that learned how to listen. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen. The fluorescent lights above me buzzed. The building settled with a groan. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the metal siding. I looked at the 3 tapes with future dates. They sat on the corner of my desk, lined up like soldiers. Waiting. I should have stopped there, logged what I'd found, filed a report, let someone else deal with it. But I didn't, because I was curious, because I was stupid, because some part of me, maybe the part that had been listening to dead people's voices every night for 6 months, wanted to know what was on those tapes. I picked up the first one. The date on the label was exactly 2 weeks away. I held it up to the light, looking for any sign of tampering, any indication that someone had recorded over an old tape and mislabeled it. Nothing. The cassette looked pristine, factory sealed. I popped it into the deck, adjusted my headphones, hit play, static, just like the others. I let it run, waiting for the pattern to emerge, and it did. But this time it wasn't tapping or breathing or footsteps. This time it was my voice, not speaking, not saying words, just sounds. The little noises you make without thinking, the way I clear my throat before I talk, the specific rhythm of my breathing when I'm concentrating, the soft click my jaw makes when I'm anxious, all of it isolated and repeated, like someone had been recording me without my knowledge and was playing it back in fragments. I ripped the headphones off. My heart was hammering. I looked around the empty archive room, suddenly aware of how alone I was. The building was silent. Even the fluorescent lights had stopped humming. I told myself it was a coincidence. Maybe I'd been recorded before and didn't remember. Maybe someone at the bureau was playing a prank. Maybe I was just tired and paranoid and hearing things that weren't there. But I knew, deep down in that animal part of your brain that still remembers how to be afraid of the dark, I knew. I didn't listen to the other 2 tapes. I logged them as corrupted, packed up Box 47, and shoved it in the storage closet at the back of the building. Then I went home, took a sleeping pill, and tried to forget about it. It lasted 3 days. On Friday, I got a call from my supervisor. She wanted to know why I hadn't finished processing Box 47. I told her the tapes were unrecoverable. She told me that wasn't my decision to make. She told me to complete the transfer and submit my report by Monday. So I went back. The box was still in the closet, right where I'd left it. I pulled it out, brought it back to my desk, and stared at it for a long time. The 3 future dated tapes were still on top. I picked up the second one. The date was 10 days away. I put it in the deck. Hit play. This time, there were no sounds, just silence. Pure, absolute silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's pressing down on your eardrums from the inside. I turned up the volume. Nothing. I checked the connections. Everything was fine. The tape was running. The levels were registering. But there was no sound. And then I realized the silence was the recording. Someone had gone to the trouble of recording 8 hours of nothing. Perfect acoustic silence. Not even the faint hiss of the tape itself. Just absence. I let it play. I don't know why. Maybe I was testing myself. Maybe I wanted to prove I wasn't scared. But as I sat there, listening to nothing, I started to feel something. A pressure, like the silence was alive. Like it was aware of me. Like it was waiting for me to make a noise so it could learn the shape of it. I held my breath. The silence deepened. My pulse thudded in my ears. I could hear the blood rushing through my veins, the tiny crackling sounds my joints made when I shifted in my chair. Every small noise felt amplified, exposed, and then, just for a second, I heard something underneath the silence. A whisper, barely audible, saying my name, but it wasn't quite right. The emphasis was wrong. The vowels were stretched in weird places, like someone who had never heard a human voice before was trying to imitate one. I stopped the tape. I sat there for a long time, trying to calm down, trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. But I wasn't. I knew I wasn't. I started researching the village. The Records Bureau had physical archives in the basement, boxes and boxes of old documents that had never been digitized. I spent my lunch breaks down there, going through everything I could find. Most of it was useless. Property records, census data, tax assessments. But eventually, I found something. A report from 1979, filed by a provincial inspector who had been sent to investigate unusual disturbances in the northern mountains. He described arriving at a village, unnamed, but the location matched the coordinates from the news article, and finding it completely abandoned. Houses unlocked, food still on tables, cars parked in driveways, but no people, no signs of struggle, no indication of where they had gone. The inspector noted something strange. The village was silent, not quiet, silent. No birds, no insects, no wind, just absolute oppressive silence. He wrote that it felt wrong, that the air itself seemed to be listening. He recommended the area be sealed off, pending further investigation. The next page of the report was missing, but clipped to the back was a handwritten note, undated, in different handwriting. Do not return. Do not speak of it. Do not listen. I sat in the basement for a long time holding that report. The lights flickered. Somewhere above me, the building groaned. I thought about the tapes, about the sounds that learned to imitate, about the silence that listened. I thought about the third tape, the one dated 3 days from now. I should have burned the whole box, walked away, quit the job, but I didn't. Because I needed to know. Because the not knowing was worse than the fear. Because some part of me, maybe the part that had been living in a leaking basement and eating ramen for dinner every night, felt like I didn't have anything left to lose. So I went back one last time. It was late, past midnight. The building was empty. I brought box 47 to my desk and took out the third tape. The date on the label was tomorrow, Sunday. I didn't let myself think about what that meant. I just put the tape in the deck, put on my headphones, and hit play. At first, there was nothing, just the faint hiss of magnetic tape. I waited, and then I heard it, screaming. My voice, screaming, raw and terrified and desperate. Not words, just sound, pure animal fear. It went on for 10 seconds, 15, 20, and then it stopped, not faded, not trailed off, just stopped, cut off mid-breath. After that, There was silence. And then, very faintly, I heard something else. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Walking closer, and a voice my voice but wrong, stretched and distorted whispering, "You hear us now." I tore off the headphones and stood up so fast my chair fell over. My heart was slamming against my ribs. The room felt smaller. The air felt thicker. I looked around, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows, but there was nothing. Just me and the fluorescent lights and the hum of the transfer machine. I grabbed box 47 and ran. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember unlocking my apartment door. I just remember sitting on my bed, the box next to me, trying to breathe, trying to think. The tape had my voice, my screaming, dated for tomorrow. I didn't sleep that night. I sat there, watching the clock, waiting for tomorrow to come, waiting to see if the tape was a prediction or a warning or something worse. When the sun came up, I felt a little better. Daylight always makes fears seem smaller. I made coffee. I took a shower. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Tapes don't predict the future. Sounds don't learn. Villages don't listen. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me to make a sound, waiting to learn the shape of my fear. I thought about calling someone, my supervisor, the police, anyone. But what would I say? That I'd been listening to haunted cassette tapes? That I'd found a recording of myself screaming dated for today? They'd think I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. I made a decision. I would destroy the tapes, all of them, burn them, smash them, erase wherever was on them before I could learn anything else. I grabbed box 47 and headed for the door. That's when I heard it. A sound coming from inside my apartment. Faint, barely audible, but unmistakable. The sound of a cassette tape playing. I froze. I didn't own a tape player. I hadn't brought the transfer machine home, but the sound was there. Hissing static, coming from my bedroom. I walked slowly toward the door. My hands were shaking. I pushed it open. Sitting on my desk was a tape recorder. Old, analog. The reels were turning. The tape was playing. I didn't recognize the machine. I didn't remember it being there. And on the desk next to the recorder was a cassette tape. No label, no date, just blank white plastic. I walked over and stopped the tape. The room went silent. I stared at the recorder, my mind racing. How did it get here? Who put it here? What was on the tape? I rewound it. It played. At first, there was nothing, just the sound of breathing. My breathing, recorded while I slept. Slow, steady. And then underneath it, I heard something else. Footsteps, moving around my bed, circling, getting closer. And then a voice whispered, distorted, wrong, saying my name. The recording went on. 8 hours of me sleeping. 8 hours of something watching me, learning me, archiving me. And at the very end, just before the tape ran out, I heard it again. My voice, screaming, cut off mid-breath. I looked at the clock. It was 11:47 a.m. Sunday, the date on the third tape. I don't know how long I stood there. Time felt strange, compressed. I thought about running. I thought about hiding. I thought about calling for help, but I didn't, because I realized something. The tapes weren't predicting the future. They were creating it. Every sound I made, every breath I took, Every moment of fear it was all being archived, recorded, learn it, and once the archive was complete, once the sounds knew everything about me, I would become part of the collection. Another voice in the static, another pattern to be repeated. I looked at the tape recorder. It had started playing again on its own. The reels were turning, the tape hissed, and from somewhere deep in the static, I heard myself scream.